They were designed to feel nothing. No fear, no pain, no aging. In the Terminator and Terminator 2, the machines were unstoppable. Cold, precise, eternal. But the people behind those faces, they didn't get that luxury. Time moved forward. Bodies changed. Lives took turns no script could predict. And maybe the most surprising part isn't what happened on screen. It's what happened after. Because while the Terminator itself never ages, Arnold Schwarzenegger did. And his journey after becoming the face of an immortal machine might be the most human story of all. Before we go on, think back for a second. Do you remember the first time you saw Terminator or T2? And which version of the Terminator stayed with you longer? The original Terminator arrived in 1984 and quietly rewrote what sci-fi could be. Then, in 1991, Terminator 2 didn't just follow it, it expanded it, turning a simple idea into something masштабнее, more emotional, and far more human than anyone expected. Linda Hamilton didn't just play Sarah Connor, she became her. In the first Terminator, she was the most human presence in the story. A young waitress, slightly unsure of herself, suddenly pulled into a nightmare she couldn't understand. But by Terminator 2, that same woman had transformed into something almost unrecognizable. Hardened, focused, driven by survival. It wasn't just one of the most dramatic character evolutions in film, it felt real, almost unsettlingly real. And that's because, in many ways, it was. The intensity of Sarah Connor didn't stay on set. Linda Hamilton has spoken openly about the emotional and psychological toll that period of her life took on her. The pressure, the physical demands, the isolation. It all blurred the line between performance and reality. She wasn't just acting strong, she was living in that mindset, carrying it long after the cameras stopped rolling. After T2, instead of riding the momentum into constant blockbuster roles, she stepped back. Not because she disappeared, but because she chose something quieter, more controlled. There were roles, of course, but nothing that tried to replicate Sarah Connor. Maybe because that transformation wasn't something you repeat, it was something you survive. Years later, when she returned to the franchise, it didn't feel like nostalgia. It felt like closure. Not a return to who she was, but an acknowledgement of everything that had changed. Because Linda Hamilton didn't just show audiences how a character evolves. She showed what it costs. And that idea of being shaped by something too big to fully leave behind connects directly to someone who entered this world at the opposite point in life. Edward Furlong didn't carry the weight of transformation. He was thrown into it. When he appeared as John Connor in Terminator 2, he wasn't a seasoned actor. He was a teenager, suddenly placed at the center of one of the biggest films in the world. And for audiences, he wasn't just a character. He was the future. The kid who would lead humanity. The one who mattered most. But real life doesn't follow narrative arcs. That kind of sudden fame, especially at a young age, can be disorienting. Furlong didn't gradually build a career. He was launched into it. And while there were roles that followed, the structure, the stability, the guidance that often protects young actors wasn't always there in the way it needed to be. Over time, his path became less about momentum and more about recovery. There were periods where his career drifted away from the spotlight. Not because the talent disappeared, but because life became more complicated than any role. And in a strange way, that contrast makes his story more human than the one he played. John Connor was destined to lead. Edward Furlong had to find his own way without a script. In recent years, there have been glimpses of return. Smaller roles, appearances, moments that suggest not a comeback in the traditional sense, but something quieter. A continuation. Because not every story is about reclaiming what was lost. Sometimes it's about learning how to keep going. And that shift, from explosive beginnings to something steadier, brings us to someone whose role was never the loudest, but may have been the most essential. Michael Biehn's Kyle Reese didn't have the screen time of a blockbuster lead. He didn't have the futuristic effects or the iconic catchphrases. But without him, there is no story. He was the emotional core of the original Terminator, the human connection in a world defined by machines. Reese wasn't just a soldier. He was a man carrying the weight of a future that hadn't happened yet, trying to protect someone who didn't understand why she mattered. And Biehn played him with a kind of grounded intensity that made everything feel believable. No spectacle, just urgency, fear, and quiet determination. After Terminator, his career followed a different kind of path. Not the constant spotlight, not the headlines, but a steady presence across film and television. Aliens, The Abyss, Tombstone, roles that built a reputation rather than a brand. He became one of those actors audiences recognize instantly, even if they don't always say the name right away. And maybe that's part of the story too. Not everyone becomes a global icon. Some become something just as enduring. A consistent presence, a trusted face, a performer whose work holds up over time without needing constant reinvention. Biehn didn't chase the machine. He stayed human. And as these stories begin to overlap, transformation, instability, quiet endurance, they point toward something deeper at the center of Terminator itself. Not technology, not action, but time. The Terminator films were built on a simple idea. Machines don't change. They don't hesitate, they don't doubt, and they don't age. Steel stays steel. Code stays code. That's what made them terrifying, and, in a strange way, comforting. Predictable. Permanent. But the people inside those stories were never given that kind of stability. Linda Hamilton transformed so completely that the line between character and self began to blur. Edward Furlong was introduced to the world at full speed, without the time to grow into it. Michael Biehn carried the emotional weight of a future that didn't exist yet, and then had to build a real one afterward. None of them stayed the same. None of them could. And maybe that's the quiet truth hiding underneath all the explosions and chase scenes. Terminator was never really about machines. It was about time. About what it does to identity, to strength, to certainty. The films imagined a future where humanity fights to survive against something unchanging. But in reality, survival looks different. It's slower, messier, less heroic, and more human. Because the real contrast isn't man versus machine. It's change versus permanence. And as the story moves forward, the faces become colder, sharper, more mechanical. But the lives behind them? They reveal something else entirely. Robert Patrick didn't just play the T-1000. He redefined what a machine could feel like without ever showing emotion. Where the original Terminator was brute force, Patrick's version was something far more unsettling. Controlled, precise, almost elegant. Every movement had intention. Every glance felt calculated. He didn't overpower scenes. He slipped into them, quietly taking control. And that level of control wasn't accidental. To create the T-1000, Patrick pushed himself physically in ways that most audiences never fully noticed. He trained to run without appearing to breathe heavily. He practiced moving with minimal wasted motion. Even the way he held his posture was designed to feel unnatural, like something imitating a human, but not quite getting it right. The result was a performance that still feels modern decades later, because it wasn't built on effects. It was built on discipline. What makes his story different, though, is what happened after. There was no dramatic fall, no chaotic reinvention, no struggle for identity in the public eye. Instead, Patrick built something quieter, something steady. A long, consistent career across film and television. Roles that didn't always dominate headlines, but never disappeared either. He became one of those actors who simply endures. Always working, always present, always reliable. And in a way, that's the most unexpected contrast of all. The man who played one of cinema's coldest, most inhuman villains lived one of the most grounded, stable careers of the entire cast. No noise, no extremes, just consistency over time. Which brings us, inevitably, to the face of the franchise. The one figure who wasn't just part of Terminator, but became inseparable from it. Arnold Schwarzenegger was already physically larger than life before the Terminator. A bodybuilder who had conquered his field, a presence that didn't need dialogue to command attention. But what that first film gave him wasn't just a role. It gave him an identity that would follow him for decades. The Machine. Few actors become so closely tied to a single character that it reshapes how the world sees them. Arnold didn't just play the Terminator. He became the idea of it. Strength without hesitation, power without doubt. And yet, over time, something unexpected happened. He changed. After Terminator, his career didn't stay locked in one lane. He moved into action stardom, yes, but also comedy, risk-taking, reinvention. Then came a shift no one could have predicted when he first said, "I'll be back." He stepped away from Hollywood entirely and entered politics, eventually becoming the governor of California. That alone breaks the idea of permanence. Machines don't evolve. They don't choose new paths. But Arnold did. And when he eventually returned to the Terminator role later in life, it wasn't the same figure. Not because the character had changed, but because he had. The body aged. The voice softened slightly. The presence, while still powerful, carried something new beneath it. Time. And that's what makes his story the emotional center of all of this. Because Arnold Schwarzenegger proves something the films never could. Even the most indestructible image, something built to feel eternal, can't escape change. But instead of resisting it, he adapted to it. Reinvented himself again and again, without losing the core of what made him recognizable in the first place. He didn't stay the machine. He outgrew it. And by doing that, he turned what could have been a fixed identity into something far more human, something that evolves, reflects, and continues forward long after the original moment has passed. Which, in the end, may be the one thing no machine was ever designed to do. In the end, Terminator was never really about stopping Judgment Day. That was just the surface. Beneath the explosions, the chase scenes, the machines rising and falling, there was always something quieter unfolding, something closer to us. Because while the films imagined a future where humanity fights against something that never changes, the real story was always about what does. Time. It reshaped Linda Hamilton's strength into something deeply personal. It turned Edward Furlong's sudden rise into a far more complicated journey. It carried Michael Biehn into a steady, enduring presence. It gave Robert Patrick a career built not on noise, but on discipline. And it transformed Arnold Schwarzenegger from an unstoppable machine into something far more rare, someone who kept evolving. None of them stayed who they were. And maybe that's why these films still matter. because the characters felt larger than life, but the people behind them remind us that nothing is. Not fame, not identity, not even the roles that once defined an entire generation. Legends don't last forever, but the impact they leave behind, the way they shape how we remember a moment in time, that's something different. That's something that stays. And maybe that's the closest thing to immortality any of them ever had. So now I'm curious. When you look back at Terminator today, which journey stayed with you the most? And does it feel the same as it did the first time you watched it? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy revisiting stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe.